same room with. Um, you, you wouldn't want to know him. You wouldn't want to, much less work for him. And this will be on the slideshow. And you can, in BSpace, and you can go read it at your leisure. Tesla's comments notwithstanding, Edison became a legendary figure, right? I'm sure you all know who Thomas Alva Edison is. But George Westinghouse, who was himself an important inventor and considerably more important to the Industrial Revolution of the late 19th century and to the transformation of everyday life, is not and was not, even during his lifetime. In part, this was due to Westinghouse's personal preference for anonymity and to maintain a private life. And despite his continuing interest in homely inventions, he was already one of the 5 richest men when he developed the modern shock absorber. That is the basis for what we use even today on automobiles. And equally important was his relationship to the development to the rise of corporations. Westinghouse saw himself as the head of a modern organization where everything thought and done belonged to the corporation. Westinghouse sought expert men to run his various departments, and while he maintained a personally active role in his firm until 1907, when he formally retired, he liked the fiction that he was just one of many working away for the common good. The Edison Company was always about Thomas Alva Edison. He claimed to have been the inventor of pretty much everything that came out of his workshop. And Edison maintained his headquarters in a small town where he could be the big figure. But his headquarters, his lab, in actuality, was far away from the corporate offices of the Edison companies when Edison was still involved. In actual fact, Edison was not good at business, and as a unit of his companies, properly trained managers generally took it over while he moved on to his next inventing interest. The world was becoming interconnected, and much like a complex machine, but Edison appeared to still be working and living in a garden of innocence. Perhaps he became a symbol because he could demonstrate the creative potential of liberating the average working man from the limitations of custom and of property. Once you're not determined by the property you own, then perhaps your brain becomes the big thing. Westinghouse represented more clearly the brute facts of modern capitalism. But he appears to have been much better liked by his employees, and he appears to genuinely have been concerned that they benefit from the success of his firm. He was an early example of what came to be called welfare capitalism. That is, he thought that a company that was doing well, the profits of a company that was doing well should be shared by every single person working in that company. Not equally, of course, but every person should benefit. They should have, if the company's prospering, everybody in the company should be prospering to some proportional degree. The humble as well as on high. And as long as an employee remained loyal to him, to the firm rather, the firm should remain loyal to him or her in bad economic times as well as good. So Westinghouse could maintain the affections of the company's employees because they generally did not lay people off, even when there was a drop in sales. So it was a damn good job to have at that time. For both middle-class people and working-class people. The high wages and ample benefits that Westinghouse provided its employees, notice I said its, not his, That was not unique, though the sense of mutual obligation was probably not as common as it could have been. For most corporate employers in the United States, high wages was an inescapable fact of life that you simply had to factor in as one of the many variables in the calculation of how to run the firm on an income-generating basis. Business for most corporate managers was a set of mathematical problems, not moral problems. This made many people uncomfortable, but nonetheless, there was a distinctively U.S. approach to making profit that proved to be extraordinarily successful at the end of the 19th century. Between 1870 and 1900, we'll come back to this later when we get into more of everyday life in the United States, overall income doubled between 1870 and 1900. The income that people collected doubled. Employment skyrocketed, with the largest increases occurring in skilled professional and white-collar jobs that paid well. And during this period, there was also a continuing decline in prices. Most Americans could afford more and were beginning to enjoy a higher standard of living, at least as would be indicated by disposable income. Poverty grew, but so did affluence. And actually, affluence grew at a faster rate than poverty. But this is one of the conundrums of the kind of capitalism that developed in the United States. Not only poverty, there is an increase in the common good, but there's also a worsening of conditions for the people at the bottom of the economic ladder. So poverty grows more fierce and takes a greater toll, while the majority of the population is living better. So, historians of American businesses have noted three features that were essential to realizing the full potential of the national market. First, the emergence of the railroads and their extension with government subsidy across every state. Now, the railroads grew because of the demand for U.S. agricultural goods. But they also grew because the government wanted to put railroads everywhere. They did not grow as a result of market forces. Rather, there would be no reason, for instance, to put a railroad to Boise, Idaho in the 1880s. But if you put the railroad there, somebody would go there and somebody would figure out a product to make that could be shipped somewhere. This was unique at the time. The only other country that attempted to use railroads in such an extensive manner was Canada, where it did it for very much more explicitly political goals, and it also did it using government corporations rather than, as in the United States, government subsidies. Secondly, the development of national marketing firms that, because of the expansion of the transportation system, could jump into every regional market within the country and compete with local merchants by offering goods at lower prices. This is something that Klein talks about to some degree, but Leach will talk about much more extensively. And third, marketing led to the development of advertising and the organization of national media, whose primary purpose was to sell the products of advertisers. So mass circulation periodicals emerge first in the 1880s, growing each decade thereafter until the 1950s. Editorial copy and advertising, and ultimately the advertising was the most important part of any mass media product, grew along with newspaper chains and national magazines. And then after that, there developed a national book market, a national lecture circuit, and then a national film market, and after 1920, national radio markets. The national media linked every community and allowed Americans to think of themselves as being affected directly by events in other parts of the country. And national politics increasingly became as important as state politics. And indeed, the nation seemed to be the place, increasingly after 1900, where the most pressing problems should be addressed. Farmers tried to address their problems with banks and railroad lines, railroad companies through the state legislatures. That didn't seem to work, so then they turned their attention to Washington. And at the time they did this, they discovered their national newspapers, newspaper chains, and national magazines that were willing to write about them and their issues. On the personal and subjective level, the changes in the national economy involved a shifting from the search for independence and autonomy, with the possibility, that is, to become a farmer or to own your own shop, machine shop, for example. With the possibility, however remote, of withdrawing from a threatening world into your business, into your farm, most specifically. And instead, an economy emerged in which everybody was interconnected. And that was the foundation of all wealth. Personal independence was the foundation of nothing. Interconnection was the foundation of everything. If you read Andrew Carnegie's Wealth, the article that he wrote in 1890, it's a defense of American capitalism by arguing precisely this point, that American capitalism is the summation of the common good. It's the summation, it's the product of interconnection. It's not a product of individualism or of selfishness. And therefore, government, please keep your hands off of us. We represent the best of American society. Let us decide how, let us take what we've learned in business and figure out how to solve other problems in society. And hence he started setting up philanthropies. With an economy that's based on interconnection, to be a success meant to work towards satisfying the needs of others, not to gain independence. And if you're a leader, it meant that you would become an effective manager and expert. So the second film really articulates the world vision of U.S. capitalists, of U.S. businessmen, much Westinghouse's film, than Edison's little self-vignette. It is that interconnection, it is that sense of providing jobs for people, of producing a cornucopia of plenty, and knowing and having the know-how to do it. That plenty is not something that just exists in our dream life. We can actually have it in the real world, because practical men who are trained as engineers first, and who become businessmen second, can figure out how to organize society so it can deliver what people want. But the price of it is that you should give up thinking of yourself as an independent individual, as a person who can retreat from a dangerous world if you need to. In fact,